How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 4 of What If Deku Had Crazy Diamond. And now, let's begin. Izuku leaps out of his bed as his ears were ringing. His alarm had started blaring, waking him up to go to school, as it was his first day back since UA had given them a 1-week break to go and spend time with their families. So as Izuku was scrambling to turn his alarm off, he would smash it, shutting it off before going over to his closet, picking out his UA uniform and putting it on, where he would then head down the stairs, where he would strangely not see his mother at all, as he must have just thought she probably had gone to work already. As Izuku would start to walk out of the house, he would continue down the stairs of his apartment building as he was continuing on to a walk. He would end up finding himself sitting on a bench waiting for a bus where a strange hooded figure would end up walking up to him and sitting down right next to him, as the strange hooded figure would then put his hand wrapping around Izuku's neck, as it would then smile creepily at him. "So we meet again, Izuku. I suppose you've figured out who I am by my voice. So, have you thought about that League of Villains offer? Because I know your exact location at all times, thanks to one of our boys' quirks. So don't think you can escape me for much longer, Izuku." As Izuku would look over right at Shigaraki, about to summon his stand, before Shigaraki would place his other hand around Izuku's neck, with both of his fingers hovering very violently over his neck as well, making sure that he didn't touch Izuku's neck with all 5 fingers, so that he'd just completely destroy it. "So, how about it, Izuku? Oh, what's this? A purple star on the back of your neck. It appears you're a Joestar. This makes you even more interesting. Imagine that, a Joestar in the League of Villains. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. So, what do you say, Izuku?" Izuku would start to fight against Shigaraki's hold, who would try to hold it, but it would pull no use, as Izuku would summon his stand, as it would go in for an attack, but just like that, Shigaraki was completely gone. Izuku would be holding his neck, as Shigaraki had violently pinched his birthmark that he had had for a while. His mother had told him that his father had also had that birthmark when they were just together, as Izuku would be nodding his head, but confused. His father, why would she talk in such a nice vein about it? He would not long on the thought for much longer, as he would rush off to UA as the bus had passed him during his charade with Shigaraki. So as Izuku was sprinting down, just trying to make it to UA on time, he would end up making it there, but everything was silent, as he would end up finally looking down at the time to see that he was an hour late and the UA Sports Festival had already started, as Izuku would start sprinting off in another direction, as he would end up making it there, where he would end up finding the locker room somehow scrambling to even do anything, where he would find the 1A locker rooms, put on his UA uniform, before he would end up rushing out through the doors, where he would then see Midnight, who was just narrating what was happening, just telling everyone that the match will now begin, as a race had just started, as Izuku looked over towards Midnight, who would just blankly stare at him. Many of the crowd would also look at Izuku, who was probably a late student. "Well, if it isn't the late student and the class representative, Izuku, and the first-year representative as well. Well, why don't you get running? You could still join the sports festival, but you might not make it since you're already a couple minutes behind." Izuku would again sprint off, as he would find his way through the corridor and passing through the starting line, where he would end up seeing some stragglers far behind, where he would see 2 0-pointers in the distance falling over. Izuku would start to speed up, sprinting as fast as he could, easily passing many people by, as many people who were jogging, just trying to make it in, not being first, would end up seeing Izuku sprint on by them, wondering where the hell was this kid all along. He seemed so determined and serious. So, as Izuku was rushing along, you would end up seeing another 0-pointer perish right beside him, but he would pull no mind to it, not wanting to bother with it as it would just delay his time. Izuku would continue on running as he would jump from just rock to rock, having passed the second obstacle, he would then make it to the minefield, where he would then summon his stand, who would punch the ground, lifting him off of it, just projecting him straight forward, right past many of the people still on the mine, where he would then end up passing the finish line, end up getting around 5th, as many of the crowd would cheer, seeing as Izuku had come from the exact back of the line and had rushed all the way through everyone and somehow managed to get 5th. That's insane. Some of the people barely passed before him by a couple seconds, while Izuku, if he had been there, he probably would have gotten the UA record for the race, especially for the first years. So many of the people there would just wonder in shock how powerful this kid must be. I mean, he is the first year representative after all. So as Izuku would be catching his breath, the next event would end up being just talked about, as many of the people who would end up passing would end up getting there. Well, now since everyone has passed, midnight would start. Since everyone has passed the race who is going to make it onto the second round, we can begin the explanation for it. So, the second round is going to be what's known as a cavalry battle. And this cavalry battle is basically going to be a team of 3 people holding up the one person on top who is going to have a headband with a certain amount of points on it. Only a specific amount of teams can pass, and that's to whoever has the highest point total on their headbands. So the first place person, to give them an added disadvantage, is going to have, let's say, a 10 million point headband. So if anyone gets it, you're most likely just going to win. As Izuku and everyone would hear this, Izuku would know he's gonna want to impress some people, and by getting that 10 million point headband. He knows it's not the smartest thing to do, but hey, he's gotta get first place, as he heard there was going to be internships after this, and he wanted to get with a good hero, and not have to be with some sidekick or some other thing that's not gonna give him much experience. So as Izuku would be starting cracking his knuckles, waiting for a team to surround him, as he just didn't bother. Many of his classmates had seen his sheer power, and they were most likely going to join him, and his assumption was right. Many of his classmates would rush over to him asking if they could join his team, which Izuku would then pick out a select group, which really doesn't matter. So, as Izuku picks them out, all of the teams would end up finishing as Izuku would receive his headband and the headbands from other people below him. As Izuku would put on his team's headband, he would tie it around his head as he would then hear that the match had begun. Izuku would instantly just jump, having many of his people below him rush off, holding him as Izuku would tell them that they need to rush off towards Bakugo, who's busy exploding off and holding off a massive crowd around them. Are you sure, Izuku? We probably already have enough points combined to pass. Trust me, it's going to be quite easy. As they would listen to their team captain, being Izuku, they would go over towards where Bakugo was, as while the distracted people were getting exploded by Bakugo, Izuku would grab many headbands with his stand. Just standing still, as many people would end up feeling that the headband around them was loosening, where they would look around to see Izuku's team just rushing around as Izuku was standing still on top of it. However, their headband was flying towards them. They would reach out for it, but couldn't grab it as it was already too far off. And since they just said, oh, well, I'm gonna get that 10 million point headband anyway, as Izuku would then ask the person below him, which would be Todoroki, if they could make a massive cloud of just steam or gas, which Todoroki would do so, mixing his ice and fire, as a massive cloud would appear, where Izuku, in the confusion, would then switch Bakugo's headband with another one, this of course being the 1 point headband, as Bakugo would not realize this, as Izuku had turned it inside out, as the smoke would end up clearing, as Izuku's team was on the opposite side, not dealing with any of them. Many of the crowd didn't know what was going on in the confusion either, as Izuku would also turn the 10 million point headband around. As Bakugo would end up doing this, one of his teammates would realize, Bakugo, where'd the 10 million point headband go? What do you mean? It's on my head! Bakugo would yell, before he would end up grabbing it, pulling it off of his head, to realize that it was just a singular point. However, as the match would end up coming to an end, the other headbands on him from his team below had barely managed them to get into the next round, and the next and final round, as Bakugo would hop off of the people below him, angrily stopping around, yelling, "Who the hell took the 10 million point headband?" Which Izuku would then walk up to Bakugo, showing him it with a smirk on his face. "Oh, you're not so powerful now, are you, Bakugo? It was really simple to take it from you, because your small brain couldn't comprehend anyone stealing it from you. You never thought to think twice during a smoke bomb." Bakugo would just stare off in disbelief before rushing towards Izuku, having a finger placed on him from Izuku's stand. However, Bakugo didn't see it at all, as Bakugo would be trying to get to Izuku but would be stuck in place. "Come on, Bakugo, you should know by now that you're not able to get close to me. I know what your quirk is. I know how it's a distance-based quirk. You trying to get close to me is just a recipe for disaster." As Izuku would be saying this, Midnight would try to calm the stakes down before telling them that they have to build an arena for the last event, being a 1v1 just battle. So as all of them were just chilling in the waiting rooms, they would end up being called out, where Midnight would then explain the rules on how this 1v1 battle was supposed to work. So as Izuku would be stretching, he would be called out that he was the first match against a kid named Shinso. As Izuku would hear this, he would then be walking out before being stopped by one of his classmates. "Hey, Izuku, I suggest watching your back by that guy. After I answered one of his questions, my mind just went blank, and I have no recollection of what ever happened. I think he has some sort of brainwashing quirk." Izuku would thank his classmate before going off, where he would then step up onto the arena. As Izuku would step up, Midnight would then tell them or ask them if they were both ready. They would say yes, as the match would begin. Shinso would start just spitting comments right at Izuku about "what did that monkey tell you?" or all sorts of things, talking about his class and different types of insults that he could manage with his mind. However, Izuku wouldn't care at all. "Oh, so you're that type of fighter, huh? Well, it's a shame you're not going to last much longer." As Izuku would rush off towards Shinso, he would then punch Shinso across the face using his stand. As Shinso would see Izuku punch him, but he didn't see anything. He would sure feel it, but nothing was there. As Izuku would come to a halt, standing right in front of Shinso, but in a certain distance where Shinso couldn't reach him, Izuku would then power up his stand before flicking his wrist back, as Shinso would then have rapid punches go right into his stomach. So he would start to cough out blood, and he would be sent flying backwards right into the padded walls behind him. As the match would look on, or the crowd would look on in shock and pure enjoyment and excitement, as they would erupt into cheering, as Midnight would then put her hand over towards Izuku, and Izuku Midoriya, the class rep and the representative of the first years, the kid that was also late to this event, moves on to the next round, Midnight would exclaim, as the next match would end up beginning. As all of the first round matchups would end up finishing, the second round matchup would end up starting, as Izuku would end up just stretching before it, where he would end up being put up against the class vice representative, being Ida. As Izuku would stretch, he would walk out onto his platform, where he would then stare on towards Ida. Midnight would ask the question if they were ready, which they would both say yes, as Ida would then rush off towards Izuku as the match would begin, going for a quick attack. However, before Ida could even kick him, his kick would end up being blocked by a mysterious force, as the crowd would end up thinking that Izuku has some sort of just insanely powerful telekinesis quirk. So, as Izuku blocks Ida's kick, the stand flings Ida's leg off of it as Ida falls back a couple meters. As Ida's falling back, Izuku's stand Crazy Diamond punches Ida right across the face twice, as Ida would end up falling back even harder. But before that, its stand would raise both of its arms into the air before slamming Izuku down into the ground. As Izuku would look on towards Ida before saying, "Oh, come on. I was hoping with your speed you'd actually be able to punch me." but it's a shame. No one's ever been able to punch me. Well, at least since I've gotten my quirk, that is. As Izuku would say this, the match would end up being finished as a knockout victory, as Ito was lying on the ground completely unconscious. As Izuku would end up walking just back, he would end up being told that he was up for the semifinals up against Todoroki, which Izuku would smile as he would end up stretching even more, as he didn't want to be just tight for the next event. As Izuku would end up walking out, having the semifinals finally begin. There he was staring down at Todoroki as the match would begin with flames going right at him. As Izuku would see this tornado of fire coming right at him, sprinting at him, as Izuku would just easily jump out of the way, where he would then rush towards Todoroki, who would block Izuku's rush with an iceberg. However, Izuku would merely jump over this, grabbing the point of it and using that as momentum to launch himself towards Todoroki. As he would do this, launching towards him, Izuku would then reach out a punch, which would be blocked by a firewall, which Izuku would then slam his other hand into the ground to block him, where the crowd would then see Izuku's flat hand stuck into the ground, holding his entire body weight up so that he doesn't go into the fire. As Izuku would then jump up before slashing with his stand, where he would be standing still as the fire would then slash in two, where Izuku would be face to face with Todoroki, as Crazy Diamond would then wind its fist back, punching Todoroki square in the face, so Todoroki would be sent flying backwards, where he would try to create an ice wall to protect him from falling out. However, Izuku would then appear right in front of him, punching him square in the chest, not as a motive to hurt him, but to propel him out, as he would hit the ice wall behind him, shattering it into an instant, as thousands of tiny little ice mirrors would then fall down to the ground, as Todoroki would slam into the padding behind him, falling to the ground unconscious from both of Izuku's hits and a slam into the padding. It was padding, but it wasn't the best. Sure, this is UA, but it's like, who's gonna spend so much money on padding when this stuff works too? It kept Todoroki safe from slamming into a wall like concrete, but it sure just wasn't enough. It was still solid, pretty much. So as the next and final round would end up beginning, Izuku would walk out to see Bakugo standing before him. Smiling, Izuku would then say, "Oh, this is gonna be good." As Midnight would ask if they're both ready, which Izuku would say yes, and Bakugo would yell, "Hell yeah, let's do this." As the match would begin, Bakugo would race right towards Izuku, as Izuku would then smile. Bakugo would stop before slamming both of his fists together, sending a massive explosion right towards Izuku. However, Izuku didn't have any of this, where he would then punch the ground, causing it to break, where a ground would then just start going over top of him, as the explosion would then pass, where Izuku would punch the ground that had surrounded him, where Bakugo would then be standing looking at it. As Izuku would punch it, it would then punch right into Bakugo's face, as Bakugo would grab the dirt behind him, launching himself back up towards where Izuku was standing, as Izuku would open both of his arms, and as Bakugo thought he was getting closer for a final blow, putting his hands together once again, aiming towards Izuku's face, Izuku's hands would close, smacking Bakugo both on the cheeks on his face, as Bakugo would then jump back in pain, holding his face, as Izuku would appear, as Bakugo would see a punch flying right directly at him, as it would then enclose on his face, slamming him down into the ground, as Izuku had punched his face, but carried the punch through, slamming his head back into the concrete floor, as Bakugo would try to launch up right back at Izuku, not having Izuku's attacks just bother him. However, before that could happen, Izuku would wrap his arms around Bakugo before slamming him back down again, giving Izuku the knockout victory. However, before anything else could happen, someone would then appear on the ceiling or the rooftop of the Colosseum. It was sort of like a rooftop, but it was much only there to shield the fans from the blazing sun. Good morning, UA. Some of you, mostly Class 1A people, may know me as Shigaraki or the blue haired one, but many of you don't know who I am along with the League of Villains. I'd just like to introduce myself and our creations. They're called Nomus. And that is where I'm going to leave this What If off, everyone. I hope you all did enjoy part 4 of What If Deku had Crazy Diamond. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.